Hello, each year Valley students are offered the opportunity to compete in the Rotary Club four-way speech test competition. The students' challenge is to analyze the ethics of a topic using the Rotary four-way test. Number 1, is it the truth? Number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Students are free to choose any topic that appeals to them for their analysis, and then they're judged by a panel of community leaders. The student who is selected from Valley will advance to a regional competition and hopefully to the state finals. This year we have had several phenomenal speeches, which we would like to share with you.
If given a hamburger at a barbecue, I ate it. If presented with a frothy glass of milk to go with some cookies, I smiled. And if my mom whipped me up an egg sandwich in the morning, I devoured it. End of story. But the plot thickens. And as I grew older and my thirst for knowledge surged, I began to pick apart the food on my plate, both literally and figuratively. And in doing so, the picture painted in my brain of farmed animals quickly began to crumble, as I learned that none of the animals on my plate had lived happy lives. This is mainly due to the fact that the majority of animals are the exploits of factory farms. Factory farming is an unsustainable method of raising animals for food that concentrates large populations of animals into tightly confined spaces with poor conditions. This leads many to ponder, is factory farming ethical? Today I will analyze this question using the Rotary four-way test, where I will ask and answer the following. Is the prevalence of factory farming the truth? Is it fair to all parties involved? Is factory farming helping promote better friendships and goodwill? And finally, is it beneficial to all concerned? When we begin to decipher if factory farming is the truth, meaning is it as big of an issue as I say it is, the answer soon becomes pretty cut and dry. For the world and the United States in particular rely heavily on factory farming, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. For 99% of U.S. farmed animals are currently living on factory farms, making the answer to the question, is the prevalence of factory farming the truth, a definitive yes. This leads to the next question, is factory farming fair to all parties involved? Now, the first party I would like to consider is that of the local farmers, who are put at a gross disadvantage and are seemingly being pushed out of their livelihoods by these large conglomerates. It was estimated between 2011 and 2018 that over 100,000 family farms lost their livelihoods to these big businesses. Now, when we walk through our local grocery store, we don't see these small farms being represented. Rather, shelves upon shelves of the big brand names such as Purdue. The other important party to analyze when asking the question, is factory farming ethical, are the animals themselves. And when we dig deeper into this question, we soon learn that the practices utilized by factory farms are nothing short of egregious. Thousands upon thousands of animals are forced to wedge into tightly confined spaces without a breath of fresh air and dirty facilities for the entirety of their lives, which is a fraction of what they could be living naturally. One first-hand witness account of a man who traveled to an Iowa factory farm for research on a book described the horrors he saw. He was able to take pictures of piles of dead piglets rotting as if they were last week's trash. And his most heart-wrenching story, that of a female pig who was thrown into the aisle of the factory farm because she was too weak for slaughter. There she could not move and was deprived of food and water, where she suffered for days until her death. Now I've presented two different parties that factory farming is not fair to, and those are the animals and the local farmers. But there is a third party, and those are the consumers. For because there are so many sick animals, they need to be pumped with antibiotics and chemical additives in order to make them healthy enough for slaughter. Then when we ingest these animals ourselves, we're also eating these new products. This can lead to food poisoning, and for anyone who has had food poisoning, they would concur that this is not fair. So we come to the conclusion that no, factory farming is not fair to all parties involved, and the only one it is fair to are these large businesses reaping the benefits of everyone else's suffering. This leads to the next question: is factory farming helping build goodwill and better friendships? And to put it simply, no. Again, the only people gaining anything are these big businesses competing against one another. And in order to out-edge the competition, they cut wages further. They cramp more animals into more tightly confined situations, and they bend animal cruelty guidelines further and further. So no system of goodwill or friendships is at work. And finally, the last question I will analyze today is if factory farming is beneficial to all concerned. The first party I would like to consider this from is that of the environment. Factory farming is depleting our Earth of its natural resources, so much so that the majority of the reason why the Amazon rainforest is being knocked down is to make way for this type of agriculture. In addition, factory farms significantly contribute to our greenhouse gas emissions, to the point where 37% of the world's emissions are the result of this type of agriculture. In addition, it takes an astounding amount of water to maintain one of these facilities, to the point where one egg takes 53 gallons of water to produce, making it clear that the environment does not benefit from factory farming. But we as humans also do not benefit, for factory farmed animal byproducts have significantly less nutrients and higher levels of fat. As well, factory farms are breeding grounds and hotspots for all sorts of diseases. For example, the 2009 swine flu of the strain H1N1, which would go on to infect 22 million people and kill over 284,000, according to the CDC in the United States. This strain was released from a factory farm, making it clear that not all parties involved benefit. So once we collect all of this information, it becomes abundantly clear that factory farming and its industry does not pass the Rotary four-way test. As humans, it is our job to protect ourselves, our peers, and our environment. And we can collectively push back on the industry that is factory farming so that our methods of agriculture can pass the Rotary four-way test. As Joel Salatin once said, while vegans and meat eaters may disagree, we can unify in our hatred and fear against the horrors of factory farming. Thank you.
What if I told you that voting rights were better protected in 1970 than they are today? This all comes down to one piece of legislation, known as the Voting Rights Act. It was originally passed in 1965 and prohibits discriminatory measures in voting, such as literacy tests. It also requires federal approval for all new voting measures in regions with histories of discrimination. This law was extremely instrumental in preventing voter suppression for decades. Then, in 2013, the Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder overturned its enforcement mechanism, opening the door to large amounts of new voter suppression. This situation made me interested in evaluating the idea of one person, one vote, which is supposed to be the basis of democracy, through the four-way test. First, is it true? Well, according to the United States Constitution, the right to vote is protected for all American citizens ages 18 and older. But as I indicated before, that's not really the case. Since 2010, 25 states have passed laws making it harder to vote. 15 of these states have passed voter ID laws, which are an issue because 11%, or 21 million Americans, lack ID. These people are disproportionately low income, elderly, disabled, or a racial or ethnic minority. Additionally, a 2014 study found that turnout is reduced 2 to 3% with voter ID laws. This can be tens of thousands of votes within a single state, which is larger than the margin that decided the 2020 presidential election in Georgia or Nevada. Additionally, 12 states have made it harder to register to vote. 10 states have made it harder to vote early or absentee. And 3 states have made it harder for people with past criminal convictions who have served them in their entirety to get their voting rights reinstated. All of these measures make it so we're not in compliance with one person, one vote, and disproportionately affect people who have been systematically discriminated against for generations. Another way we're not in compliance with one person, one vote is gerrymandering. A good example of this is in Pennsylvania under the maps for House elections drawn in 2012 that have since been thrown out by the courts. The Democrats and the Republicans each received approximately 50% of the vote. But Republicans won 2/3 of the available seats. Clearly, some people's votes counted more than others. Second, is it fair? Well, the idea of one person, one vote is fair, because everyone has an equal opportunity to influence their government. But since this isn't the reality in the United States, we're working with an unfair system. We can make it more fair by reinstating the Voting Rights Act and by moving to independent commissions to limit gerrymandering. Independent commissions are less biased than our state legislatures because they're usually more politically balanced. Also, members of the commission do not have an incentive of greater job security by drawing biased maps. Moving on. 3. Will it promote goodwill and better friendships? I want to examine this question in terms of limiting extreme political polarization that we're seeing today. If we reduce gerrymandering, we will have more competitive districts where candidates from either side could win. This forces candidates to engage with a broader swath of the ideological spectrum and forces more moderate ideas to have more of a presence and people to talk to both sides. All of these things do decrease polarization. There are measures such as moving to ranked choice voting that would be more effective, but limiting gerrymandering does help. 4. Would it be beneficial for all concerned? Well, if we enforce one person, one vote by limiting gerrymandering, it will decrease political polarization. If we have a less polarized government, it can take more action and do things for the people like it's supposed to. We'd all benefit from a government that can do more to help us out. Additionally, when you have less polarization, there is less voter suppression, indicating that if we decrease voter suppression now and polarization, and it will help it to stay that way. Finally, if everyone has a more equal voice in government, groups that have been systematically left behind will have more chances to influence our government, and we will have a greater potential to make change and try to right the wrongs of the present and the past. So, in summary, in theory, one person, one vote clearly passes the 4-way test. The unfortunate thing is that that's not a reality right now, and we need to take rapid action to change that. The one takeaway here is theoretically, democracy passes the 4-way test, but the current state of American democracy does not. Thank you.
Our world today is entirely dependent upon gendered stereotypes. I mean, parents announce the gender of their baby with pink confetti for a girl or blue confetti for a boy. So today I'll be analyzing gender and the issue with assigning gender to clothing. Now, when analyzing a topic using the 4-way Rotary speech test, we're asked to think about, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Does it build goodwill and better friendships? And Is it beneficial to all concerned? So to begin, no, clothing is not the truth. It is not the truth that a dress is only intended to be worn by a woman, because why can't a man wear a dress? There's no real answer to that question other than he could. But it's truthful to say that when we see powerful men on television, they're dressed in buttoned shirts ironed to a flat surface, ties around their necks, suit jackets encasing their manhood. But the truth is that a man wasn't made to wear a suit, but that a suit was made to be worn by a man. And this difference is astronomical. From the time that our civilization came to, men and women have had very different roles in society. A man was to be a protector, to provide for his family, but a woman? Well, she was to cook, to clean, to have kids. And clothing was made to emulate that. From the start, women have worn flowy tops and skirts and dresses. Women were never meant to have an opinion, and their clothing was made to emulate that. It was made for them to float along in whilst doing what they were told. But a man, well, he was the head of society, the alpha dog, the ruling king, and his clothes reflect that. Wearing pants shows that he was ready to take charge, and a suit and tie emulates power and respect. But the truth is, a woman possesses no less power than a man, even though her clothing says otherwise. And a man looks just as good in a dress as a woman, but society says he can't wear it. There's no truth behind clothing, and there's no truth behind what clothing attempts to portray about people. Now, is clothing fair to all concerned? Well, that depends if you think it's fair to be told what you can and cannot wear, depending on whether you choose to identify as a female or a male. In society today, we tell people to express themselves, to show who you are, but then we halt the brakes. We confine this pledge of expression to what we consider to be socially acceptable, especially in terms of clothing. If a woman were to wear a suit, she isn't expressing herself, she's a fool. She's trying to be somebody that she can't be. And if a man wears a dress, well, he's gay, he's girly, he's a screw-up. Harry Styles, one of the most popular artists of the current generation, chose to wear a dress on the cover of Vogue magazine. And in the article he said, there's so much joy to be had in wearing clothes. And I think if you get something that you feel amazing in, it's like a superhero outfit. He was expressing himself, wearing something that made him feel confident, and yet how is it fair that we tore him apart for it? People on Instagram, Twitter, and more wrote things like, "This isn't manly, it's gay. Be normal." And male feminism is an ongoing problem today, and it goes strictly against the Bible. Like Jesus never wore a piece of fabric draped over him as a dress. The amount of backlash that Styles received for simply wearing a dress was astounding. And his Vogue article is a clear display of how clothing has been made to further the bias and divide between male and female, and proves that it isn't fair that we must conform to this socially and politically motivated concept that clothing has gender, and that it serves as a reflection of the appropriate actions and image of a man and woman. Pushing gender onto clothing does quite the opposite of improving goodwill and friendships. It has become so ingrained in our brains as to what we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to act, that the second we stray away from this, we become an outcast, a weirdo. And who wants to be that? And even worse, who wants to be friends with that? The New York Times writes how there have always been people who defy these gender norms. Late 19th century medical literature described female inverts as appallingly straightforward, with a dislike and often incapacity for needlework. There have always been outliers to these gender norms, but time and time again, these outcasts have socially struggled to fit in and be accepted by their peers. The UK News reported about a 4-year-old girl who was teased relentlessly at school for wearing Star Wars shoes because she loved them. In a video that her mom had posted, the little girl said that the boys teased her, saying, "You have boy shoes, you have boy shoes." And when asked how she felt, she said sad. It's the same with the little boy who was in my preschool class that got bullied when he told us his favorite color was pink because it was a girl's color. At this point, people all around the world are being forced to conform to society's gendered standards in order to fit in and to make friends. Finally, how is assigning gender to clothing beneficial to all concerned. It's not beneficial to the people who are told they can't wear what they want, or those who are bullied for wearing clothing not assigned to their gender. But it's beneficial to the news outlets who have stories to report about social controversies like Harry Styles with a dress on Vogue. It's beneficial to the clothing companies who prey on innocent people that feel the need to buy clothing to fit their gendered box. A pink box with a bow and frills and dresses for the women, and a blue box with cars and suits and ties for the men. Assigning gender to clothing isn't beneficial to the people who have to wear the clothes, to the little girls who get picked on for wearing shorts and sneakers instead of skirts and dresses, to little boys who get bullied for wearing princess dresses because they wanted to. And continuing to comply with these biases and further the gender divide through the use of clothing is a harmful tactic used by companies and corporations to benefit themselves and their wallets whilst causing the opposite effect on their consumers. Our world is controlled by gender and gender stereotypes. There are men's razors and women's razors, men's deodorant, women's deodorant, girls' toys and boys' toys, and clothes for women and clothes for men. But nothing is different, and each of these gendered items serves the same purpose as the next. The only difference is that girls have to use the girl things and boys have to use the boy things. Thank you.
I got a job this summer. I got a job for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which was I was 16, society was collapsing around my ears, and I suddenly found myself with something of an abundance of free time. Plus, the ever-looming beast of higher education continues to grow ever nearer, and as such is a consistent driving force in my life decisions. I digress. The point is, this summer, I got a job. That job is as a cashier/service clerk at the Big Y world-class market, the one in Old Lyme where that one sushi guy murdered that other sushi guy back in 2017. It's a good job. Good coworkers, good pay, plus every time, without fail, a customer turns into my register from my right, their left, they will bump their cart into my register, and there is endless humor to be found in that. As a customer service employee, I, like many others, have found myself an ardent observer of the human condition. And through these observations, I have found a simple test of ethics, an easy way to determine a person's moral standing and judge their character accordingly. And it all centers around the shopping cart. You see, at the Big Y world-class market, we promise world-class service to all of our patrons, which means that we do not allow inexperienced, untrained morons to be your cashier. As such, until I could complete my cashier training, I was relegated to my role as a service clerk. This entails jobs like bagging groceries, returning items to their proper place in the store, and cart collection. And it was in this last role that I found my test. You see, it is a truth universally acknowledged that when you finish shopping, the correct and proper thing to do is return your cart to the cart collection area, usually found scattered throughout the parking lot with large signs indicating their purpose. Barring an emergency, there is no reason that a person would be unable to do this. It is a simple task. What's more, returning your cart just makes life easier because when your cart is in the collection area, it is not in the lot, taking up spaces, making it difficult for other customers to maneuver around the lot and find parking spaces, forcing myself and my coworkers to wander the parking lot in its entirety in 90-degree heat, pushing lines of carts 8 to 10 strong for hours on end. It's really just not a good time. However, while returning your cart is obviously the correct thing to do, it is not enforced. There's no law saying you have to. You will not be punished if you don't, nor will you be rewarded if you do. It is an action purely for the benefit of others. And it is this which makes the shopping cart test such an effective test of morals. You must return the shopping cart of your own volition, out of the goodness of your heart, because you acknowledge that it is the right thing to do. The Rotary test is a code that can be applied to any scenario, and it very helpfully states the core principles that make the shopping cart test such an effective indicator. Is it the truth? Is it fair to everyone? Does it build goodwill? Is it beneficial to everyone? This isn't about shopping carts. I mean, it is a little because I've just spent the past several minutes ranting about them, but in a much larger way, it's about character. Are you willing to do the right thing when no one is looking? Not putting your carriage in the collection area is an inconvenience. It is also an indication of your behavior in other scenarios. In a particularly relevant example, throughout this past year, there has been a lot of controversy about social distancing guidelines. If you are not in a high-risk demographic, do you follow these guidelines in protection of those who are? So, the next time you go shopping, return your cart. And if you don't, then I want you to look at your cart taking up yet another parking space at noon on a Saturday, with 5 odd drivers roaming the lot looking for spaces. And as you drive away, I want you to look to the storefront, where you will see 2 service clerks sweating through their shirts, trying desperately to suction the last few drops of water from their plastic bottles, or pushing lines of carts up and down the parking lot. And then I want you to think back to your cart, back in the lot, and I want you to ask yourself this: what do you do when no one is watching? Thank you.
We live in a society where breaking your arm has people running to sign your cast, but discussing a mental illness has people running the other way. For teenagers, this fear of stigma leads to isolation, loneliness, and failure to seek treatment for the one thing we need most: our mind. Mental health is a person's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. For teenagers, their mental health is especially important as they grow and develop into adults. Where the issue arises is not normalizing mental health. Instead, society has subconsciously placed a stigma on the topic. The mental health stigma is the discrimination and shame that people experience when discussing their mental health with others. Using the Rotary 4-way test, we can examine the mental health stigma and the steps we can take to create a safer and more comfortable environment for our minds. The first question we ask ourselves: is it the truth? Is the stigma projecting truthful facts about mental health? Well, the stigma leads us to believe that mental health is an uncomfortable and rather shameful topic that shouldn't be discussed in society. It tricks our mind into thinking that burying our feelings inside is strength, but admitting when there's a problem is weakness. But the truth is that mental health is the one thing we all have in common and should feel free to discuss openly with others. Stigma hides this truth. For example, modern-day therapy is surrounded with stigma-based lies. Many teenagers have a very hard time asking for a therapist because they fear the judgment of others. But the truth is that teenage therapy is used for a variety of reasons, such as developing insight, self-awareness, and acquiring the skills to live a happy and successful life. All great things. As a collective, we need to erase the false stereotypes drawn in our mind by stigma and replace them with writings of the truth, that mental health is a good thing. The next question we ask ourselves: is it fair to all concerned? To answer this, let's follow activist Kevin Briel. In high school, Kevin was an outstanding athlete and popular among his peers. But what his friends, teachers, and even family did not know was that Kevin was suffering from severe depression and hiding it from all aspects of his life. Eventually, the burden of covering up his illness became too much, and Kevin found himself in his room writing his suicide note. Luckily, Kevin turned his life around and began sharing his experiences to spread awareness about this stigma. Was it fair for Kevin to have to hide his depression from the world? Of course not. Teenagers already have so much on their mind, and for fear of stigma to be added to this load is not fair for them. But the question implores, is it fair to all concerned? So we must ask, was it fair to Kevin's parents or even his friends? No. Loved ones hope that their teenager will be able to communicate when there is a problem, but stigma often prevents this from happening. For Kevin, his parents were going through a divorce, a very stressful time for both parent and child. They had their plate more than filled, and to have extra worries added to this from stigma is not fair to them. So let's take this experience and now apply it to the mental health of all teenagers, not just those dealing with an illness like depression. It is unfair for teenagers to feel insecure when discussing their mental health when it is such an important part of who they are. It is unfair for teenagers to have to hide their mental stability because of a stigma. Next, we ask, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Stigma does the opposite. Instead of bringing goodwill to the world, stigma creates an environment of hostility. How are you is a phrase that we ask others all the time, even strangers. And a simple, I'm fine, has become the default answer that society accepts as the correct one. If you were to ask this question and someone responds with, I'm actually not feeling great today, I feel very sad, you would be caught off guard and feel very uncomfortable. This is what stigma does to the world. It causes us to believe that admitting how we really feel is wrong and should be avoided. Furthermore, friendships are not benefited from the stigma. The cycle goes something like this. A teenager is feeling down, they distance themselves from their friends, the friends then assume they aren't wanted anymore, and just like that, the friendship is destroyed. All because both parties were afraid to admit to the other how they were really feeling. Now let's imagine a friendship where stigma does not exist. In this friendship, you feel comfortable to go up to your friend and say, I'm going through the worst part of my life right now. And then they reply with, that's okay, let's go talk about it. Good friendships like these are impossible with this stigma. The last question, and perhaps the most important for this issue, is it beneficial to all concerned? Discouraging teenagers to talk about their mental health is the most harmful to them. The stress that teenagers are under today with school, social media, and a pandemic is incomprehensible. I've talked to peers, and to us, it feels like every day is on repeat. With online school and missing out on social activities, it's exhausting and our minds are taking the biggest hit. For society to turn their backs on teenage mental health when it needs the attention the most is one of the biggest disservices they are doing to our generation. Mental health stigma is also not beneficial for the rest of the world. Stigma leads to less people seeking treatment, causing rates of mental illness and suicide to increase for everyone, not just teenagers. If we were to solve stigma, we would create a more accepting and happier world for everyone. The inevitable truth is that one day our teenagers will be leading the world. Their minds will be the leaders, the inventors, and the ultimate decision makers of our society. For people to disregard the mental health of these future leaders while instead raising them in an environment of stigma is not for the greater good. These adolescents will need all the tools provided, and awareness of mental health should be just one as important as the next. Because if our world is set free from these cuffs of stigma, our adolescents will prosper and our future will thrive. Thank you.